bishop in chess is al-fil. And that actually comes from Arabic. Fil, the same word fil as this, meaning elephant, because the bishop traditionally was to represent elephant units somehow. Similarly, in Russian, the word for bishop is squad, and that also means elephant. Okay. 10-159. Haven't made a huge dent in it, but we're getting there. Okay, gonna do some Chinese now. Nei. Nei. Man. Yen. Yo. 5. Ducks are drinking wine. Banglas. Banglas, okay, Banglas is duck. Okay, I have now leveled up. Let's see what the XP situation is now. 10,340 out of 12,500. And as always, viewers can choose my next language for me just with a follow and a $5 to my Patreon. I buy a computer or quack, and here's another example. I like to point these out. For this word for or, quack sounds vaguely like Hogun and the hok in Hogun in Korean or waku in Japanese, and that appears it is the exact same kind of character. Oh, I see. This is Dikhe Ishai Fui, which means do you want food? But yeah, are you hungry? That kind of thing. How are the boys? Cine da boy. Posso Milao. Pote. When is it? Proteine. Udros. Potopolo. In the designated chicken-eating area, obviously.
Leave. Monsieur.
See.
Livre. Liwe, livre.
맞아요.
Yeah.
시. SOP. 맞아요. 그렇지. 인터. 고치기. 아. 시.
Oedden coginio panas.
Jacob. Hefed. 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 Hek. 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 Mwalimu.
This is Arabic. And it's from Mu'allim.
Juma ni mwalimu mke.
Oh, things to do cat signs. Meow and the pictures of the fish. That's they were proud.
Sööpä. Kupu. Yrittävät. Uraista. Omena.
Are in the city center. And it's got some interesting aspects to it.
여자는
I mean,
어느 나라에 있습니까? 여자는 어느 나라에 있습니까? 여자는 어느 나라에 있습니까?
countries for living things.
兄の名前は
Perfect. Okay, 3 of 4.
El hospital.
Okay, we've leveled up and it is time to pick another language. Morfar är tröttare än vanligt. Maten är färdig. And let's see what we're doing when we get back. Greek. We're doing Greek when we get back. Ben neredeyse her gün okula giderim. Uyum. Fun fact. Turkish. Hello, Shakespeare. How you doing? Fun fact, in Spanish, the word for bishop in chess is alfil. And that actually comes from Arabic. Fil. The same word fil as this. Meaning elephant, because the bishop traditionally was to represent elephant units somehow. Similarly, in Russian, the word for bishop is squab, and that also means elephant. Okay. 10-159. Haven't made a huge dent in it, but we're getting there. Okay, gonna do some Chinese now. Nej. Nej. Man. Igen. Ja. 5. Ducks are drinking wine. Bambas. Bamba, okay, Bambas is ducks. Okay, I have now leveled up. Let's see what the XP situation is now. 10,340 out of 12,500. And as always, viewers can choose my next language for me just with a follow and a $5 to my Patreon. I buy a computer or quack, and here's another example. I like to point these out. For this word for or, quack sounds vaguely like Hogun and the hok in Hogun in Korean or waku in Japanese, and that appears it is the exact same kind of character. Oh, I see. This is Dikhe Ishai Fui, which means do you want food? But yeah, are you hungry? That kind of thing. How are the boys? Cine da boy. Posso Milao. Pote. Buenese. Proteine. Udros. Potopolo. In the designated chicken-eating area, obviously.
Li. Monsieur.
See.
Livre. Liwe livla.
Maciej. Ja. Si. Wysoki. Maciej. Proč? Inter. Počkej. A. Si.
Oilen coginio panas.
Jacob. Hefed. 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 حقد حق 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 معلم
This is Arabic. And it's from Mu'allim.
Juma ni mwalimu mke.
Okay. Oh, things speak cat sounds. Meow and the pictures of the fish. That's they were proud.
Sööper. Hupu. Yrittävät. Uraista. Omena.
Are in the city center. And it's got some interesting aspects to it.
여자는 어느 나라에 있습니까? 여자는 어느 나라에 있습니까? 여자는 어느 나라에 있습니까?
Countries for living things.
兄の名前は
Perfect. Okay, 3 of 4.
El hospital es
Okay, we've leveled up and it is time to pick another language. Morfar är tröttare än vanligt. Maten är färdig. And let's see what we're doing when we get back. Greek. We're doing Greek when we get back. Ben neredeyse her gün okula giderim. Fun fact. Turkish. Hello, Shakespeare. How you doing? Fun fact, in Spanish, the word for bishop in chess is alfil. And that actually comes from Arabic. Fil. The same word fil as this. Meaning elephant, because the bishop traditionally was to represent elephant units somehow. Similarly, in Russian, the word for bishop is squab, and that also means elephant. Okay. 10-159. Haven't made a huge dent in it, but we're getting there. Okay, gonna do some Chinese now. Night. Night. Man. Yen. Yo. 5. Ducks are drinking wine. Banglas. Bangla, okay, Banglas is duck. Okay, I have now leveled up. Let's see what the XP situation is now. 10,340 out of 12,500. And as always, viewers can choose my next language for me just with a follow and a $5 to my Patreon. I buy a computer or quack. And here's another example. I like to point these out. For this word for or, but sounds vaguely like Hogun and the hok in Hogun in Korean or Waku in Japanese, and that appears it is the exact same kind of character. Oh, I see. This is Dikhe Ishai Fui, which means do you want food? But yeah, are you hungry? That kind of thing. How are the boys? Cine da boy. Posso Milao. Pote. When is it? Proteine. Totoro. In the designated chicken eating area, obviously.
Li.
Monsieur.
See.
Livre. Liwe, livre. Maciej. Yeah. Si. Wysoki. Maciej. Proč? Níte. Počkej. A. Si.
Oedden coginio panas.
Jacob. Hefed. 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 Hek. 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 Mwalimu.
This is Arabic. And it's from Mu'allim.
Juma ni mwalimu mke.
Oh, things to do with cat suns. Meow and the pictures of the fish. That's they were proud.
Sööpä. Kupu. Yrittävät. Puraista. Omena.
Are in the city center. And it's got some interesting aspects to it.
여자는 어느 나라에 있습니까? 여자는 어느 나라에 있습니까? 여자는 어느 나라에 있습니까?
Countries or living things.
兄の名前は
Perfect. Okay, 3 of 4.
El hospital.
Okay, we've leveled up and it is time to pick another language. Mordförrättare än vanligt. Maten är färdig.
Just as an example, if this audience hasn't ever delved into Swedish, I'm sure they can understand the following, right? Jag heter Oskar. Jag heter Oskar. Vad heter du? Vad heter du? Jag heter Oskar. Right? It's super, like everybody gets that.
Alvaro.
Var bor du? Var bor du? Bor du i Berlin? Bor du i München? Bor du i Tokyo? Jag bor i Sverige.
Hi, Oscar.
Hey Alvaro, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you, and well, welcome to the podcast. First of all, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure is all mine.
Yeah. So as usual, why don't you start by telling us about your experience with languages, like your early experiences in Sweden, your struggles if you had them.
Mhm.
Yeah, anything that comes to mind that you think that can be useful for the audience.
Okay. Well, so I'm from Sweden. I learned Swedish, obviously. but I was always interested in video games growing up. And today I'm learning Japanese, and I have been for a few years, and I think that harkens back to those days as well. But I didn't know it by then. So I was playing games in English back then, and I had to call for my dad to translate like Donkey Kong 64 stuff like that whenever there was a cutscene, and there wasn't a lot of them back then. Couldn't really play any role-playing games except for, you know, are you playing games at all, Alvaro?
I mean, I've, for example, in my classes, you know, I've experimented with board games, for example.
Board games, okay. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've played a couple of role-playing games when I was a kid.
Right, but does a game like the Diablo, does that tell you anything?
I've heard about it, but I think I've never played it. No, but is it like a role-playing game as well? Or?
Yeah, it's kind of like a hack and slash role-playing game. It was made by Blizzard in the 90s, and I was playing that, but that's a pretty dialogue-heavy game, I would say. But I couldn't really understand anything back. back then. But one day, I remember my dad was getting kind of sick of having to run, because he was a floor down as well, so he had to run up the stairs and help me, because I couldn't go to him with with the text and everything. So one day he got kind of sick and tired of it, and I just went, okay, I'm gonna try to understand it on my own, I suppose. And I just, and you replay these games so many times, and eventually I don't really know how, but eventually I got pretty good at English at a fairly early age, I suppose, fairly young age. And I believe that story is not unique to me at all, and probably not unique to Swedish people either. But my experience is that Swedish people get English pretty early on. And I suppose not only from games, because we weren't all playing Diablo, but we did get home from school and we watched shows like Full House and Fresh Prince in Bel-Air, Friends, stuff like that. Frasier, Married with Children. I don't know where we found joy in that show when we were like 11 years old, but it was on, at least. And it was marginally more fun than watching the news, I suppose.
Right.
Sorry, I have a colleague here, apparently. So yeah, and then, so I guess it wasn't a conscious effort, is what I'm trying to say. I wasn't learning a language. I was consuming stuff that I liked consuming and loved consuming. So we were all interested in Hollywood movies and video games and music from the US and England and stuff like that. So it just kind of came naturally.
Right. That's like a common theme. Like I always talk about it. Like, the importance of not, I mean, how to put it into words, like not trying to learn a language, I was going to say, but not like focusing on message, on communication, as opposed to the language itself, form, right? It seems to be the way that a lot of people learn English. Or other languages in their childhood because they weren't trying to learn the language. I mean, I guess somehow it's there in the back of your mind, you know, that you're hoping it's going to help you. But in your case, you're so immersed in the game. You're so interested in playing the game, in understanding what's going on, what you have to do to get going, things like that. That in a way, you kind of forget that you're listening to a different language.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel it's the same now with books. I read a lot of books right now. I guess it's the fall. It has to do with the season, I suppose, because I've been slacking off on that front during the rest of the year. But now it's fall, and I'm reading maybe 2 books a week at least, and they're all in English. And I never think about that as a barrier. And I guess sometimes I stumble on a word that I don't really this, but I just accept it and I try to figure it out from context, so that I don't get into this loop that I'm kind of in with Japanese, where I really need to look up words every 5 or 10 minutes or something just to figure out what's actually happening.
Right. We'll get into Japan. Is in a moment, but yeah, that's interesting. I also talk about that many times. Like when you're reading a book, especially when reading books, but with any resource. But people, again, because of the traditional grammar approach that taught us to pay attention to form and things like that, And to a specific word. I understand why we do that, right? But we tend to try to pay attention to the specific words. Like, did the author use this? I don't even know what the word is. This conjugation or this verb or whatever, as opposed to focusing on content, on meaning, which is the most important thing. And ironically, the way you're actually going to learn the language, right? But what I mean by that is when you're reading a book, I mean, it depends on how well you understand that language, but for the most part, in your case, you're reading it in English. And there's always going to be 2, 3, 4 words here and there that you don't understand. But again, most of the times, like you said, you're going to figure them out of context.
Yeah.
Many other times, you're not, but that doesn't have any impact on you understanding what's going on. And only if you feel like understanding that word is necessary for you to understand what's going on, like it's really key. That's like the only situation in which I personally look up a word if I'm reading a book in a foreign language. If I don't understand it, I can't figure it out because of the context, and I feel like I need to know what that means in order to keep going, you know? And even then, you also have like 2 options when it comes to how are you gonna figure out what that means. Meaning, like, one is just to go to the translation, like quick translation into your language or whatever the language is. Or you can even look it up in the dictionary in your target language. Right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
right, instead of just going for the translation, which, I mean, like right away you're going to understand what it means. But I think it's even better if you find a dictionary in the target language that explains what that word means in your target language.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of that's a high level thing to do, though, right? To be able to search it, for instance, in Japanese, to search for the dictionary definition of a word. But once you get there, and once you feel like you're kind of knocking at that door, yeah, definitely, that's a huge thing to stay immersed, I suppose.
So before we get into Japanese, I have one last question. about when you started with English that you said, because I've interviewed other people from I've interviewed a friend from Finland, for example, and we talked about why it is that Scandinavian people in general, speak English so well. Like in other European countries, like Southern European countries, for example, we tend to look at you guys as, or we tend to give the credit to the school system, which I think is not the reason. And my friend from Finland told me the same thing. Like, it's not that the school system is different. Like, the language classes in the school system were pretty similar to what we all have in mind, like grammar, conscious effort, and so on. But it's about those other activities that you mentioned, like playing games, watching series, and things like that in the target language. Because, for example, in Spain, it's all that. So I remember watching The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but in Spanish, right? So what do you think is the reason why? Because I've been to Sweden a couple of times, to Denmark, and you can talk with anyone in English, and you're gonna be fine. And their English is pretty good. Like, and I'm not just talking young people, which is the case in a lot of countries. I'm talking like 70 years old, and people like that they can perfectly communicate in English. Why do you think that is?
Oh man, I could only guess. I don't really know. Maybe there are similarities in the language, then that kind of it's to our benefits. But I could only guess as to why. Then again, man, you're from Spain, and I feel like when you think about Spain and you consider Spain as a country, it's so full of history and culture and stuff to be proud of, and we look to Spain as well whenever we're interested in like football or whatever it may be, and when we want to go travel, we want to go to Madrid or Barcelona, stuff like that.
Right.
So maybe we're a country that lacks, at least maybe we did lack an identity or confidence. I don't know, man, but I feel like we were quick to jump on the US train and be interested in Hollywood and stuff like that.
That makes sense. Yeah, well, as you were talking, I was thinking that, like the grass is always greener on the other side, right? Like we look at you because of your English. You look at us because of our identity or football or whatever it is. You always put other people on a pedestal and forget about yourself or yours, But yeah, that makes sense what you mean. Because, for example, in Spain, I mean, because Spanish is such a powerful language, because there's so many countries that speak it as a native language. Because I've been thinking about this a lot, because I've seen it here in Poland where I live, or countries like Romania, where the languages are not so quote unquote popular or powerful in the world, like English, Spanish, French, that they tend to speak other languages better than we do in Spain, for example, that French people do, and definitely, American, British, like native English speakers. And I don't know if it's because we feel like our language is so popular or so useful, right? Because obviously English is number one, but Spanish, you can travel to a lot of countries where it's their native language, right? And there's the recent music movement with all the Latin music and so on. So it's really popular all over the world. So we feel like we don't need to learn other languages as much as someone from Sweden, like you said, or like I have friends from Poland, of course, but Romania, or countries with, again, quote unquote, not so popular languages.
But when you grew up, did you watch dubbed movies? Movies that you spent?
All that, yeah.
Ah, okay.
Like Spanish television is all that. Like movie, series, it's that.
Yeah, that's probably a big part of it, right?
Sorry.
That's probably a big part of it then, I suppose.
Right, because the interesting part is you look at, or you compare Spain with Portugal, like we live in the same peninsula, and I'm gonna generalize here, but we're similar characters, things like that, and they speak English in general. They're much better English just because of that, because they don't doubt anything. And it's also the reason why, if you're trying to learn Portuguese,
Oh, I hit the... Okay. Now I should not be muted. Yeah, he does look like Starmer. This is... Oh, well, you should be able to hear me now. Okay, that is weird. Oh, hey, Olga! I also didn't see you there. Yeah. I'm not used to streaming directly to YouTube on here. And the windows are less intuitive. The controls are a bit of a pain in the ass on OBS.
it's hard to find resources from Portugal, actually.
And when okay, so I had, there's an option, either live chat or main messages. And I had assumed that the way to see all your messages is to have it on live chat. Because that's what it says on the box. And it turns out, no, actually when you put it on live chat, it doesn't show you anything. It shows you bugger all, in fact. Lots of people are starvationing now, that's not great. And we've got a breathability problem. Oh. Yes, I have, in fact, been muted the entire time. Fucking hell. That's not great. I am going to take a little bit of a bio break. I will be back in just a couple of minutes. Yeah, that has happened to me a couple of times. Yeah, not so much lately. Although the smaller the chat, of course, the less likely somebody is to actually, remark on it, and then it can happen. Bloody hell. Okay, I'm gonna be back in just a couple of minutes. Perfect. Okay, 3 of 4.
El hospital.
Okay, we've leveled up, and it is time to pick another language. Morfar är tröttare än vanligt. Maten är färdig. And let's see what we're doing when we get back. Greek. We're doing Greek when we get back. Ben neredeyse her gün okulan uyu. Fun fact. Turkish. Hello, Shakespeare. How you doing? Fun fact, in Spanish, the word for bishop in chess is alfil. And that actually comes from Arabic. Fil. The same word fil as this. Meaning elephant, because the bishop traditionally was to represent elephant units somehow. Similarly, in Russian, the word for bishop is squab, and that also means elephant. Okay. 10-159. Haven't made a huge dent in it, but we're getting there. Okay, gonna do some Chinese now. Nei. Nei. Man. Yen. Yo. 5. Ducks are drinking wine. Bambas. Bamba, okay, Bambas is duck. Okay, I have now leveled up. Let's see what the XP situation is now. 10,340 out of 12,500. And as always, viewers can choose my next language for me just with a follow and a $5 to my Patreon. I buy a computer or quack, and here's another example. I like to point these out. For this word for or, quack sounds vaguely like Hogun and Hok in the Hok in Hogun in Korean or Waku in Japanese, and that appears it is the exact same kind of character. Oh, I see. This is Dikhe Ishai Fui, which means do you want food? But yeah, are you hungry? That kind of thing. How are the boys? Cine da boy. Posso Milao. Pote. When is it? Proteine. Utros. Topolo. In the designated chicken-eating area, obviously.
Liv.
Monsieur.
See.
Livla. Liwe livla. Maciej. Yeah. Sí. Eso que. Maciej. Proč? Inter. Počkej. A. Sí.
Oilen coginio panas.
Jacob. Hefed. 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 Hek. 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 Mwalimu.
This is Arabic. And it's from Mu'allim.
Juma ni mwalimu mkeni.
Oh, thanks to cat suns. Meow and the pictures of the fish. They were proud.
Sööper. Kupu. Yrittävät. Uraista. Omena.
Okay.
I'm back and I'm audible, which is good. And I've decided I'm gonna start over here. Because the thing about this game is there's a lot to learn. Ah. And I keep on learning more. Like, there are these extremely long tutorials because there's so much shit that goes on. So I'm gonna start out, so each time I get better at this. Let me see. Hiding, digging, doctoring. Caregiver, good. Increase medicine. Okay, this is not a bad start. And yeah, so all the stuff that I've been talking about, I've been commenting on this bloody video the whole time, and none of that's been audible. That's not great. Okay. One thing I have learned is that you want to dig up. Yeah, he actually does a bit. These are your little clone people. Yes, I did. And on Twitter, a TERF came to his defense. Just wonderful company he's in. Okay, we're digging. Gonna get some resources. Need to have a storage bin. Ah, yes. Oh, we've got a bunch of water. That's good. What to do is centralize the water holdings. Get a ladder going. I'll have to set up some bogs for them as well. Because otherwise they just piss all over everything. And also, I've actually had one starve to death right in front of food. Which is to say, they are better at hunger strikes than Jamie Bryson. A Boulder Dash type game? I don't know Boulder Dash. Actually, now you mention it, I feel like maybe I've heard the name, but... Okay, we need some beds as well. Start out with 3 beds. Beds and bogs. Well, actually, let's make it 5. Because I will eventually be adding people to this. And... tile. Have 1 bog for now. Wash basin. That we haven't really tapped into a water source. Also need to get the oxygen situation under control. Oh, what's this? Oh, wow. In the game from the days when all racing cars looked like the Cybertruck. I have to do some oxygenation here. And other thing that needs to happen fairly soon is a food source. They haven't actually built the storage bin. One other thing that needs to happen, I need a generator to connect all this shit. Looks like the streams from the original Ghostbusters. Sucking them up in order to put them in the storage bin. Oh well, now he's having it. Yeah. Little happy face as he comes out. Set priorities on stuff. Everybody's going to sleep. The way my windows are set up at the moment, your comment got cut off, so it looks like it says, "What's Keir Starmer doing? He rocks." speed this up. Wire in there. Oh, that's not too bad then. Rendering anything? I mean, it's probably in part due to the fact that I'm using Wi-Fi. That'll do for a little bit of lag. Oh, hang on, I still need the generator. Okay, power. Need to actually connect it to the stuff. Okay. So, now, getting that food source situation sorted out, getting the oxygen situation sorted out, beginnings of this colony are taking shape. There. Oxygen generator is generating oxygen. Some mush bars. It's up to priority 6. Stay on top of it. There we go. Sweeping up all the crap. La vamos a ver. And sleeping. Speed them up a little. auto harvest on the meal wood. Your pump so we can start deriving water from waters. They fortunately do not need to drink water, but all sorts of other processes require it. Oh wait. Apparently, there's absolutely nothing to be gained from disinfecting the bogs. It does not affect it doesn't affect their likelihood of getting germs or anything like that. So, apparently the best advice at the moment is to disable the auto disinfect on the... Oh wait, suffocating. Who's suffocating? Oh shit. Okay. I see the problem. Hey, that priority up. He's in a low oxygen zone. See, that's red. That means the air is not breathable. And he's too deep. There we go. He is no longer suffocating. That's good. I prefer them not to be suffocated. Okay, let's see, what can we... Oh, an oxyfern seed. That's not a bad care package. Now we need more storage bin. When these things turn red, that means that there's no place to go once the stuff's been swept off. Breathability. Crops. Doing pretty good on food, considering that we're not growing any yet. Priority. Big A. I'll just stick it on all that's... Next thing we need to do is set up a research station so that we can start to work on improving our technological situation. What's really cool in this game is that there is like automation and robotics, and the way things like the AND gate and the OR gate and all that stuff are set up to work is basically how those components work in real life. So, you can sort of learn robotics in playing this game. Breathability is at 100%, that's what we'd like to see. There we go. Jerky mouse. Okay. Set up research station. It's fog deficit. This is true. Must be addressed. Oh, she's trapped up there. The rest of that situation. Wait a second, how the hell did she get up there in the first place? Like, I literally do not see how that happened. Oh, no, she's... How? How's she up here? So, yes, we need a mop because she just pissed all over everything. I do not see how that happened.
Research station working. Sort out the oxygen. Okay. Bluetooth. Base. I used to have the habit of putting everything at top priority, and the trouble is when you put everything at top priority, nothing's at top priority, and nothing gets fucking done. Okay, got skill points to assign. Okay, what's our oxygen? How's our oxygen now? The lighter the color, the more breathable it is. Okay, what's with this crap that is... Not time to bring any more duplicants into the world just yet. Oh, bloody hell. Oxygen situation is improving somewhat. Okay, time to start handing out priorities and setting up our little rota. Okay. Oh, we need a research for this. And now we have one. Oh, fuck, she's stuck. See, these duplicants aren't great, at working independently. They're in need of a great deal of supervision. And I think for the last, nearly 45 minutes, we're gonna just switch gears here. And look at and focus more on the language. Kind of curious what the worst Japanese learning advice ever is. I'm gonna check that out.
So I asked my Twitter about the worst advice they've gotten on learning Japanese. And here are some of the replies. Don't bother. Japanese people prefer you speak English anyway, and the only people who will be your friends will all speak English anyway. Now I probably don't have to say that this is not true.
Yeah. It's not.
But I can also see the type of people who would say this kind of thing. You know, some of the people who teach English in Japan, who only speak a little bit of conversational Japanese, mostly just hang out with other English teachers. Some of those people are like that, but you don't have to be.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like that's also the demographic that is most likely to seriously believe that these sort of standard conventional methods of language teaching actually fucking work. I mean, the thing is, they don't. But if your only experience is teaching others and not so much the actual learning of a language yourself, it's very easy to get the idea that they do. I mean, that is what is sort of keeping the skills-based approach to language teaching alive, really, is people who don't have any experience successfully acquiring a language.
Also know other people who make friends with Japanese people who don't speak English because they speak Japanese. So it's really just up to you. Use that bird app. I wonder if people who actually give this kind of advice have learned.
Yeah, I mean, that's... Duolingo is bloody useless. I mean, if you enjoy playing it as a game, that's, I mean, cool. I'm not going to yuck anybody's yums, but, I don't think I used that phrase. But as a method of actually properly learning a language, it isn't one. It absolutely sucks for that. There's just no end of problems, and I used to speedrun Duolingo all the time on this channel, and I gave it up because it got really boring having to point out the exact same things every single time, because it does not give you context. There's like exactly one thing on there that I think would be a good sort of infrastructure for learning languages, which is the stories and stuff like that. If they were to just focus on that, then you'd potentially have something there, but instead they don't, and yeah, I think it's actually more discouraging than anything. Ineffective methods often are.
Learned Japanese at a higher level. I don't think you'd give this advice if you are serious about learning a language and know a lot about how one acquires a language. The kind of Japanese you learn as a beginner is important because it tends to stick. So why would you want to feed yourself with inaccurate pronunciation, weird phrases that Japanese people never use, and misleading instruction? I've also made a couple of videos about Duolingo, so maybe you want to check them out.
Oh yeah, I mean the pitch accent is often wrong. Of course, the thing about pitch accent that is worth keeping in mind with Japanese is that it actually varies from region to region.
Date a Japanese girl. Well, now I have two problems. So I can see why this is not always a good advice, because if your Japanese girlfriend speaks in a very feminine way, and if she is the main source of
yeah, in fact, this is actually for a long time, guys from the US were stereotyped as sounding very feminine in Japan, specifically because most of them, the only Japanese they ever learned was from like women they hung out with, and so it ended up so this influenced the way they spoke. Of course, these days that doesn't, I mean, the conventional distinctions, the much more sort of gendered ways of speaking are less common. I mean, I was watching a few months ago a panel discussion on how often translations into Japanese have much more strictly gendered speech than you would actually encounter amongst Japanese speakers. But I mean, that is a development over like the past like 20-30 years mostly. And so there was this stereotype for a long time, like in the first few post-war decades.
You will end up sounding like a girl, which in itself isn't a problem, but if you are a straight man dating a Japanese girl, that probably won't represent your gender identity and sexual orientation. And I've known guys like that, just as this tweet.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of exactly how you're trying to. It's a matter of how you're trying to present, really, more than anything. Like, if that is how you want to present, if you want, if you're going for the Twinkie vibe, cool. I mean, then that definitely a great way to pick it up. I mean, you will absolutely pick it up that way. If that's what you're trying to sound, if you're not trying to sound like that, then you're gonna need a broader source of input. All about how you're trying to sound.
It says, I know an engineer in the USA who learned Japanese from his wife. Problem is, his Japanese is littered with all the female usages. It kinda hurts to listen to him. Behind his back, the Japanese engineers sneer at him. Now, the gender difference in Japanese is an interesting topic I want to cover in the future. But not all women speak in a very feminine way, so
Yeah, there is less and less of that, in fact.
it really just depends on who you learn Japanese from. A better approach is, of course, learning Japanese from a variety of inputs. To avoid kanji until you know the whole grammatical structure.
Oh god, that is a horrible idea. Kanji, the thing about kanji, people, like, when learners often slag off kanji. Because there's a lot of memorization, they're complicated, there are like a million different readings for them, but here's the thing about kanji. They're what make the language usable. If you take kanji out of the language, it is impossible to make sense out of the written word. You literally, it becomes impossible to read. You absolutely need kanji. There's just no way around it.
It caused me to drop the language entirely several times until I realized what was wrong. Sometimes you need to just jump into the water.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's the thing. You don't have to avoid kanji, but you don't have to learn 2,000 kanji before reading any Japanese texts. Also,
Yeah, I mean-
generally don't recommend learning stuff in isolation while ignoring other aspects of the language.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to really learn kanji properly, it's like everything else. You need a context. Everything we do, humans are very context dependent on all sorts of things. Like, so if you're just learning contextless anything, especially to do with language, then it's just never gonna properly stick. These days, with the developments of technology, it's actually become easier to learn kanji, I think. Because now, like, if you're reading Japanese ebooks, and you find a kanji you can't read, you hover your finger, you hold your finger down on it, it'll pull up a Japanese dictionary, and you will get the reading of it.
Can be like grammar, kanji, vocabulary. Balance is key. Just immerse yourself. I tried it.
That bad advice in general. Immersion, in and of itself, is not an effective method because you don't have the comprehensibility. You really need to. Immersion is not a bad idea once you've kind of got to an intermediate level and you've got something to work from. Immersion, when you've got nothing to work from, is just frustration.
This for my first 2 years in Japan. Fumbled my way through social instructions. Wasn't learning much. I've been paying the teacher to speak one-on-one for a few years now, and that's improved my Japanese tremendously. So, immersion is a very poorly understood concept by many people. Some people think immersion will be like just keep listening to something even if you don't understand anything. That's not how you learn a language.
Yeah, I mean, that has its place because it helps you kind of get used to the rhythms and stuff like that. I wouldn't entirely write it off. I mean, but it isn't, you're not going to learn a language only by doing that. You need more than that. You need, in particular, you need stuff that you're going to be able to understand. It has to be comprehensible input, a phrase that you hear a lot on here. So ideally you want stuff that you're going to be able to understand at least half of. The more you understand, especially at the beginning, the better it's going to help sort of mold some spaces in your brain that fit the language. So, like, just straight up immersing in stuff that you don't understand anything of is really not going to help.
If you want to acquire a language, you have to process and understand your inputs. So when you hear something,
I had not really watched a whole lot of Utah videos, but it's just nice to hear this. I immediately feel good about a language YouTube channel when they start talking about this, because you have so much language, like so much shitty language advice that is all about, ooh, you gotta drill skills, you gotta fill in the blanks and do conjugation exercises, and it's like, no, yeah, it's completely useless. That's a recipe for burning out and not much more. When I hear somebody talking about input and talking about the good stuff, the really optimal kinds of input where you understand a fair bit to start out, then I have some confidence in their advice.
You acquire a little bit of Japanese. When you read something and you understand, you acquire a little bit of Japanese. So comprehension is a very important part that many people miss. Another common misconception is that you need to understand your material without any help, like looking up words in a dictionary. But getting some help is completely fine.
Yeah, the key is you don't want to be looking up a whole lot. I mean, I was saying this earlier, but I was muted, so you didn't hear me, unless you're really good at lip reading. If you find that the input you're using requires you, in order to make any sense out of it at all, to just be looking up every other word, yeah, it's the wrong stuff to be working with. What you want is something where you can get the broad gist of things, for the most part. And then, if you occasionally are looking something up because you aren't really sure what's going on with it, that's not bad. I mean, but ideally you want to be, you don't want anything that takes you out of the text, that takes you out of the source. The more you can actually work out in your brain, you know, on your own, what you're actually reading, the better.
Look up words you don't know. Maybe you want to read a translation to see if your understanding is correct. You can use whatever help you need. As long as you understand your input,
there's no such thing as cheating in this process.
So take your time, because it will probably take some time in the beginning because you don't know a lot of Japanese. But if you keep doing it, it gets easier. And if you need my help, I will directly teach you the kind of Japanese that real-life Japanese people today actually use, because textbooks and apps teach you their own versions of Japanese that don't
often it sucks.
Quite reflect how Japanese actually is. So click the link in the description and subscribe.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a whole style of Japanese teaching that, you know, that is based on sort of a sanitized version of the language. I imagine there's somewhat less of this now because there's so much more access to Japanese, but people would, very much try to direct students, learners, away from anything that was considered not entirely kosher in the language. And you get this really sort of boring version of Japanese, as opposed that has nothing to do with what you're actually going to be hearing and seeing day to day. I imagine, but that is one of the advantages, really, of looking at natural input intended for like a native speaking audience as well, because you're going to get something that is more to do with the actual way the language is spoken.
To my email group. Stick to only the Genki books. So one of the common problems with textbooks is that
it said you don't really need to learn katakana. なんだよこれ。そんなアドバイスする人いるか?
the kind of Japanese that they teach you is a very poor representation of actual Japanese.
I've never heard of these books. The books that I would recommend for somebody who's trying to learn Japanese that are really great for this, it's Power Japanese. That series, it's from Tuttle. And those played a huge role in leveling up my vocabulary and helping me understand how how the language works. Because one of the things that is great about them is that they have the combination of natural example sentences with good translations, good idiomatic translations, and often they would break those sentences down in a word-by-word gloss as well. And that is the sort of thing that is absolutely key to helping to understand how expressions are constructed in Japanese, because the whole way phrases and expressions are constructed in Japanese and Korean as well is just different to the way it's done in English. You have to get used to the different way of doing it, and good translations with good example sentences are really key to that. So, I mean, I've never heard of the Genki books, but yeah, if I'm hearing that they suck, then I imagine there's probably a reason.
That we actually use. And they also oversimplify Japanese, in my opinion, which works for some people if you just want to speak just good enough Japanese and be done with it. Maybe it's fine. But if you are interested in understanding the complexity of real-life Japanese, and if you want to sound like a native speaker, textbook input is not really good for you. So if you're using a typical textbook, be sure to get your examples from authentic materials. So you have to think about what kind of Japanese you want to learn and how far you want to go. Also, please don't judge real-life Japanese using the knowledge that you learned from textbooks that are specifically written for non-native speakers. They use a kind of learner's grammar, which
山下先生は結婚していないと。明日試験があります。休みにさ、明日試験があるという。
which has its own purposes, but it's just not designed to analyze the complexity of real-life Japanese grammar. We also have books.
And the thing is that prescriptive grammar is always an approximation of how people actually talk and write and stuff. It just is. Yeah, I mean, linguists are still working on making sense of the grammars of languages. If you were to actually look at a descriptive grammar of, say, Japanese or English or any language, the level of complexity you actually have to get into is way beyond anything that any of these like grammar notes and stuff like that ever get into. There's so much stuff that nobody ever gets taught. Like, I mean, just think about the way, if you're a native English speaker, the way you use come and go. There are lots of times when it seems like fairly intuitive but the rule is actually much more complicated than it looks. Like, think about how, if I say, like, let's say I'm in a pub, and I say to my friends, I'm going home. But let's say then I pick up the phone and I want to let somebody at home know that this is the case, that this is what I'm going to be doing. I would say, I'm coming home. Well, what the hell is that, actually? And that's not something I've ever noticed any, like, grammar book. No teaching, no language class or anything like that has ever touched on this. In fact, I mean, I've been speaking English for over 40 years, more or less. And I only really noticed that bit of grammatical weirdness in English this year. Just this past year. I've been using that all my life, and then at some point, actually, when I was thinking about something going on in another language, I mean, this is one of the cool things about learning other languages. Suddenly you notice how weird the language you're used to is. And so all, like, grammar instruction is an approximation of the way people actually speak. And so you will get a lot farther. This is why you really shouldn't bother with trying to study grammar, because you're getting every single utterance in the language contains fractals of the grammar.
Let me get them. So we have books on Japanese grammar for native speakers, and the kinds of grammar that they talk about are more suitable to analyze complex real-life Japanese. But there are also limitations. For example,
Yeah, because I mean, this is going to be geared towards the stuff that native speakers have trouble with. And actually, I consider it an achievement unlocked when you start to when your grammar questions start to be the sort of things that native speakers have never managed. Anytime, like, I remember I was working on writing something in Japanese a while ago, and it occurred to me it wasn't really clear to me which counter you'd use for, I forget what it was, and so I decided to look it up. I just Google it, and it turns out there's a really long Reddit thread with native speakers arguing amongst themselves about which the correct way is, and it's like, yeah, score. When your confusion about grammar is the sort of confusion that people who grew up with the language have, you've achieved something. But the thing about books like this, those are going to be focusing on those areas. But the thing about grammar is, the really fascinating stuff is the stuff nobody gets confused about, everybody just kind of does, and nobody thinks about. And that's what linguists spend years and years and years and years and years and reams of paper trying to work out. So this is like the smallest part of the grammar, the part that is complicated to native speakers. The stuff that is totally uncomplicated and everybody just kind of does is what's really fascinating, because nobody's ever taught it for the most part. Like, I mean, English speakers will use come and go in this really weird idiosyncratic way that we never give any thought to all the time. Nobody taught us this. Nobody sat down and said, okay, this is when you say come and this is when you say go. We just all kind of do it that way. We all make that call. We all more tend to agree to a great extent on when to make that call. And it has very little to do with just relative direction or the things that, if you were to ask somebody, why did you say come and when do you say come, when do you say go, they would make it about relative direction. And that's kind of not right, that's kind of not wrong, but it's like a much more complicated notion of direction than anyone even thinks about. And that is what's fascinating about the fact that we've all acquired this framework that makes that work.
when it comes to basic Japanese grammar, we actually don't have a single way of explaining it that everybody agrees with.
Yes.
Modern Japanese grammar
And this is true of just about every language. Hmm. 対利点と呼ばれる記号が見られます。次の例のもとに、対利点が古代中国語のどのような特徴を反映したものか考えなさい。漢文 classics.
is actually not a very well established discipline. So different people explain basic Japanese grammar in different ways. I emphasize basic Japanese because even with fundamental things like, oh, what is the subject? Or do we even have a subject, which many people say we don't.
And you know, how and what do you do with wine ga? Which is like there are layers to that.
There are so many things that we don't agree with. And many people read something about Japanese grammar in English online and think, oh, this is the Japanese grammar. But actually not, it's just one of the ways of explaining Japanese grammar. And lots of resources in English I came across online, they don't seem to be aware of different ways of explaining Japanese grammar.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, all of this stuff is way more complicated than it is ever presented for learners. Because the thing is, it's being presented for learners by people who didn't have to learn it for the most part. And the people who didn't have to learn it, they focus on the stuff that they actually thought was complicated. that they did need some kind of teaching on. But the thing is that the stuff that actually makes somebody sound native-like is the stuff that you don't have, that nobody ever has to get taught. When you have that stuff, that's when you start to become, indistinguishable from somebody who's spoken a language all their life.
But you definitely shouldn't think that what they read online is the truth, and you have to take everything with a grain of salt, including my videos.
Yeah.
I explain Japanese in the best way I can think of.
Okay, that was
with
really
my
confusing
current-
for a second, because he's wearing the same color in the main video there. So it's like, wait, did he just clip this wrong or something? And it's like, oh wait, same color, totally different outfit.
knowledge and experience. But as I learn more about Japanese, as I gain more experience, I might change the way I explain things. Because nothing
Yeah.
is set in stone, and I constantly learn more about Japanese and try to improve the way I explain Japanese. Another huge limitation is that most of those grammar theories are based on written Japanese instead of conversational spoken Japanese.
Yeah, I mean, and everything is an approximation of something. の家が主役だと当分の機能ここが出口よと彼女は言った
And I think it's fair to say that spoken Japanese is harder to analyze because a lot of things are context dependent. So
everything.
things that apply to written Japanese don't always apply to spoken Japanese. Having said that, if you are interested in learning
Yeah, and vice versa too. Like, there are things that you do in the spoken language that would generally be frowned on in the written language. And everything transgressing those norms is also a thing that you just do sometimes. And it's all about, and when you get down to it, fundamentally, it's all about the vibe that you're going for. The better you know a language, knowing the knowledge of a language, mastery of a language is very much about controlling the vibe. So, knowing that the difference between just different ways of saying the exact same content, but with a very different vibe. And the more you have that vibe control, the more you have the language. And the way you get that, really, is by exposing yourself to lots of input in the language, and you start to get a sense of the vibe.
practical Japanese, you don't have to understand Japanese in this abstract theoretical way. This is for people who
I'm enough of a grammar nerd that I immediately am interested in this reading list.
are interested in analyzing Japanese in an academic way. It is interesting, but it's not necessary to acquire Japanese. You can perfectly...
Like, I literally want to write down the names of these books. Because I'm curious, because I have not really spent a lot of time studying Japanese grammar in Japanese sources. I mean, I occasionally look stuff up and stuff like that. But I'm kind of curious in there. There are probably things I could do for, like, refinement that would not be a bad thing.
understand Japanese without coming up with a complex theory of how each word interacts with each other in a...
I am, again, enough of a grammar nerd. I like to come up with the complex theories. The minute I notice some sort of weird grammatical thing in a language
abstract
I know, I am immediately working out some sort of theory that tries to account for it.
way. The best book to start is Minna no Nihongo. So
読んだことねえ。
Minna no Nihongo had so many problems that I don't even know where to start. Poor representation of the language, questionable choices of words, questionable exercises. There's just so much stuff. I feel like I need to write a long essay about Minna no Nihongo or something.
See, this is when there were there's been an explosion in like Japanese textbooks and things like that in the past like 20, 30 years, and most of them I've never even heard of, because my formative Japanese learning was in the 80s and 90s, and there was just none of this stuff.
Some people say, oh, I learned Japanese from Minna no Nihongo, so it should be fine. But the thing is, yes, you can learn some Japanese from Minna no Nihongo. But is it really the best resource? Or is it even a good resource? And my answer is no. In this day and age, when you have so many options, I can't think of any reason why you have to actively choose Minna no Nihongo. It's pretty unfortunate because it's actually the most popular choice of textbook in Japanese language schools, because they have been using this for...
Yeah, I mean, and this, again, doesn't surprise me, because the schools that are teaching the main local language as a second language are populated, staffed often by people who do not have a lot of experience with the learner's end of language acquisition. And so they just use what they've been told is effective, having really no yardstick against which to measure it from their own experience with languages. And so you get a lot of really just bad practice.
For so long. Some of them seem to be understaffed, teachers just come and go, and they just can't afford to implement better ways of teaching. And there are many better ways of teaching and learning Japanese. Quite unfortunate. So it has its role in some parts of the teaching community, but with English speakers who have lots of choices, there's no reason to pick this particular textbook. And I'm far from the only one who is aware of the problems, right? Because there's also a lot of research that shows how Minna no Nihongo is detached from the kind of Japanese that we write and speak today. Learn Romaji first, it will make it easier. So,
I mean, the thing about Romaji is it's literally just the Latin alphabet. Most of the people watching this already essentially know it.
one of the first things you need to do if you are serious about learning Japanese is to learn the letters, basic letters, hiragana and katakana. These are phonetic letters, and it's also a great way of learning the pronunciation.
Yeah.
Of course, if you're just trying out Japanese, if you want to see if you like Japanese or not, using Romaji or the Latin alphabet is fine. But if you decide that you want to learn Japanese seriously, the best thing you can do is to learn hiragana as you learn how to pronounce Japanese.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, knowing this two-syllabic writing systems is really the key to making any kind of advancement, because that gives, I mean, that really is the foundation of everything else in the language. There are, if you only know those, you're going to be in difficulties, at least initially. You really need kanji in order to get anywhere in it. But you, as a starting point, really, knowing hiragana and katakana is really sort of essential.
Sounds. Use textbooks with Romaji. Again,
No.
learn the letters. There aren't that many. And relying on Romaji means your sources of input will be severely limited.
Yeah.
The internet is a great thing. Because of the internet, you have access to a lot of native content. It doesn't make sense not to use it to learn Japanese. And even if you
Yeah,
don't...
I mean, YouTube is full of stuff in all sorts of languages. I mean, in Japanese certainly, but in all sorts of languages, even languages that are not widely learned by foreigners. Like, I find plenty of interesting content in Georgian, which is not a language that a lot of people outside of Georgia spend much time on. You can find all sorts of stuff, and a lot of it is free. I would spend much more time on looking for stuff on topics that interest you in your target language, in Japanese, whatever, than investing in, a lot of these textbooks.
don't know a lot of kanji, we actually have a lot of resources with furigana. The small furigana above
Yeah,
kanji.
there is, in fact, for Japanese, the NHK has a no kanji service for specifically for learners, and a food, like a basic Japanese service, where then you can read the news in Japanese geared towards learners who are just really getting started out, and they have like furigana on all the kanji and stuff like that. I mean, there are lots of resources.
Books for kids often have furigana. Many manga also have furigana. So learning hiragana has a huge return on investment.
Yes.
Memorize kanji by looking and writing the one kanji for a week straight, and you'll have it down. That's really bad advice, and unfortunately, I
don't even understand what it means. I literally do not understand what the advice is supposed to be.
Tried to learn kanji that way when I was in Japanese school. Very bad idea. Makes no sense. Don't do it. There's different ways of learning kanji that are effective. So just pick one that works for you and just do it. Passing JLPT N1 means you're fluent.
And,
It is not on many different
standardized
levels.
tests are bullshit.
Levels.
And
JLPT
with that,
is-
it is time to wrap up for today. I will be back at 4:30 tomorrow on Twitch, and we will be doing more Oxygen Not Included and excellent language learning advice. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Sorry about the audio problems. I will be making sure that that doesn't repeat itself tomorrow. And now it is time for me to contemplate eating food.